dashing deed. Some people say he's deceased, others say he's still alive. We're going to try to get to the bottom of it. After posting bail, Darryl vanished, and he is bad crazy. I knew that the moment I spoke to him. When I heard about the next scandal, that's when I thought, okay, this guy's getting in over his head. But he was eliminated by the cartels, skinned alive, shot to death, and hung off a bridge. Hey folks, my name is René Enriquez, and you are watching Uncensored. Some people say he's deceased, others say he's still alive. We're going to try to get to the bottom of it. This is Darryl D. Castrejon. Dashing D. Castrejon was a high-ranking member and enforcer for the Mexican Mafia, La M, who became notorious for executing a vanishing act after posting a massive $1 million bail. He took off to Mexico. That was the rumor, that he was in Mexico, that he was working with cartels over there, and then we heard that he was eliminated. He originally rose to the ranks of the Ontario Barrio Sur street gang in San Bernardino County, eventually becoming OBS's direct connection to Los Angeles leadership and one of the prison syndicate's prominent heavy hitters and enforcers. All that's true. Darryl Castrejon was juiced up. We're talking about Dashing D here. A Dashing D, the person that was supposed to have been executed in Mexico. And Darryl did have juice. He was a young brother. In fact, this picture here, there is a red circle around his face. This is a very young, early picture of Darryl. This could be in AC or I believe it's North Block. I believe this is a picture taken in North Block. It could be AC though. I obscured one person's face because we don't want to depict him, but Dashing D is in the upper left-hand corner with the red circle around his face. The individual in the center squatting is my co-defendant and my crimey, Benjamin Topo Peters. But a lot of people have ran this story down, have tried to get the background on it, and little is known. Darryl vanished after posting bail, standing trial for the execution of another Mexican Mafia member by the name of Frankie Buena, also known as Frankie B. We're going to get to that in a minute, but I wanted to show this other picture of Darryl. I believe this photo was taken in Corcoran State Prison. Darryl was there for quite a while after being transferred from San Quentin, but while he was in San Quentin, this is where he really made his bones and became a prominent carnal. He became a very prominent carnal in C-section in San Quentin State Prison. June 22nd, 1984, the day that marked Darryl in the annals of Mexican Mafia history forever, because it was a brazen hit. It was a brazen hit that he participated in. In fact, Darryl was shot in the eye, and I'm showing you a picture of him with an eye patch that was taken sometime after the murder he committed in San Quentin. San Quentin set up death. San Francisco, Associated Press. San Quentin officials have been accused of setting up the leader of a black prison gang for death on the way to a peace meeting with the reputed hitman of a rival Hispanic gang, according to a report aired Tuesday on K-Ron TV. The report detailed the slaying of Louis Montgomery, 21, who was stabbed in the chest and throat by Darryl Castrejon in front of a dozen guards and counselors on June 22nd, 1984. K-Ron said leaders of Montgomery's gang, the Crips, contend prison officials set up Montgomery because they were afraid of the group's increasing power. The state attorney general's office has agreed to look into the case. The situation reported Montgomery and Castrejon were escorted from a high security section of the prison by just one guard in violation of the prison's rules, requiring one guard for each inmate. They also had their chains and handcuffs removed, another violation of department rules. After the killing, the report said, Castrejon was searched and officers found a knife, handcuff key, and a razor blade. K-Ron said the killing took place in front of several guards, but Castrejon's only punishment has been suspension of canteen privileges for 90 days. He has never been charged with the slaying. Both Bob Denninger, deputy director of the State Department of Corrections, said although the case raises questions about a faulty search and quality of guard supervision, there is absolutely no indication of any kind of conspiracy. No one at San Quentin could be reached Thursday night for comment on the station's story. Now, what they don't know is that there was a war going on, right? There was a war between the Mexican Mafia and the blacks. There was a war between the Mexican Mafia and the blacks. In fact, it got crazy. In AC, blacks were hiding under beds. They would stay back in the yard, cut out their bars, and hide under the beds. And Sureños and Mexican Mafia were doing the same thing. It was crazy. So you'd go out to the yard, you'd come back, everybody started looking under their bunks. In fact, we started to do it too in Folsom because this was happening. BGF were striking back. They were striking back. This was a real war. And it went on for a while. And the original war started with this guy named Roger Crossway. He was from 18th Street. I forgot his name, but he got stabbed in the county. He brought it back to Folsom and told the cardenales that the BGF stabbed him and he was allowed to take off. That started the war. He was allowed to retaliate on the BGF and that started the war. It started originally with the BGF, but eventually extended out to the Crips and everybody else, Crips and Bloods. Anything black was fair game. That's how it panned out. But this original hit by Darryl was really what put him on the map, right? He was a cardenal, and San Quentin Cardenales were fanatical, right? It was a different breed from Folsom. San Quentin and Folsom Cardenales were completely different. In my experience, Folsom Cardenales were laid back, more liberal, easygoing. They politicked just as hard, and they eliminated people just as much, but it was just an easier group to be around. The San Quentin brothers were extremists. They were radical. They wanted to eliminate everything in their path, and they often did, right? And Darryl was not without controversy, right? The label of an informant or snitch followed Castrejon for decades, though his exact status remained heavily clouded by prison politics, street rumors, and his sudden disappearance. Early snitch labels, 1980. Castrejon was branded as a prison snitch in certain prison circles as early as 1986, which was documented in local news publications covering gang activity. However, he remained an active high-level hitter within the ambit for decades. I'm going to tell you straight out, I never heard that. I never saw paperwork. I never heard one person say Darryl was an informant. Not once. So, again, sometimes we have to take this with a grain of salt, right? We put out a number of these stories. Joe Morgan, Johnny Martinez, and people question the veracity of that because it comes from a news source. But in the case of Joe Morgan and Johnny Martinez, those are supported by court documents, right? And the reality is, in Joe Morgan's case, that the case is so old, they didn't even document, they didn't even preserve the record. So we rely heavily on the media for that. And in Johnny Martinez's case, supported by some court documentation. Now, the veracity of those issues is for you to decide, right? Not me. And this, I'm going to say straight out, I never heard this about Darryl Castrejon. I never heard that he was an informant. I never heard about the controversy, but he was involved in controversy. Obviously, every Mexican Mafia member is. They get embroiled in some political imbroglio, and it depends really on their political savvy and their socio-political skills and what they've done for the organization, really. But at the end of the day, sometimes you could be the most juiced up guy and still get whacked. Darryl, fortunately for him, was able to survive all this. So we talked about the hit on Montgomery in 1984, right? Well, a lot of people don't know that somebody else was supposed to do that hit. In fact, this guy, Ambrose Gill, Sporty from White Fence, was the original person that's supposed to do the hit. He was the one that was elected to go, but he begged out of it, and he pushed it off onto Darryl, and there was a lot of resentment between Darryl and Sporty. In fact, Sporty got washed up behind this. But the story goes like this. Sporty Gill was a tier tender, what you might call a porter or a janitor. He'd come out and feed people. During this process of being a tier tender, during this period of being a tier tender in C-section at San Quentin, he started having an affair with a female sergeant. They would sneak into the little secluded area, and they'd have their affair, and they'd do their thing, and he didn't want to lose that. So he had Darryl, who was a much younger brother and who had been in for a shorter time than Sporty. He told him to do it, and that's how it went down. But for years, this was a cloud over Sporty's head. Once Darryl got to the adjustment center with other cardenales, he began spreading this rumor. He started pushing the issue on Sporty. But Sporty was around other cardenales and nobody took action because this was an issue between him and Darryl. It was really dependent on Darryl to take care of this because he could have said, hey, it's given to you, you do it. So it was kind of like hey, this is your business, you handle it. If you handle it, we'll agree on it. If you handle it, we'll agree on it. And that's how it went down with Sporty. Years later, actually decades later, after decades of Darryl politicking on Sporty for not doing the hit, the original hit on Montgomery, he finally encounters Sporty in Corcoran State Prison. This is at a time when a lot of individuals were going down to Corcoran and claiming psychological issues so they could stay. And Darryl was one of them. In fact, they continued the rule that no Sureño could take psych meds because once you're there on stress or whatever it is that you claim being your issue, they would issue you psych meds, but nobody could take psych meds, including Darryl. So he stayed there for a long period of time. And during that period, he ends up on the same yard with Sporty from White Fence. And Sporty is a big boy. He's a beast. He's batshit crazy, but he is a beast, right? So Sporty incorporates the assistance of Playboy from White Fence, and they stab up Ambrose Gill on the yard. They stab him up. They don't do damage. They don't do anything even major. It's all superficial. They separate Sporty, and he ends up in Pelican Bay State Prison. Years and years later, I see Sporty there. I am debriefing in the IGI's office in Pelican Bay State Prison, and they bring in Sporty. By this time, camaradas and sureños are disrespecting Sporty on the tier. He's considered on disregard, and camaradas are taking action against him, right? And note that when Darryl hit Sporty, he took a camarada. That was the only way it could be done back in the day. And then once a carnal was hit, then camaradas could take action. Like the video I showed you last week about Tonito, had two camaradas taking action against a carnal who no carnal had ever raised a hand against. That was a complete separation and deviation from protocol. But in this instance, Darryl took a camarada on a hit of a carnal. And it's okay because he was there personally doing the hit. And then after Camarada started taking flight on Sporty, that was completely acceptable because he's considered no good. He's already been touched by a carnal, and anybody is considered open season. So Darryl takes a Playboy on this hit. They go and successfully complete the hit. They don't do much to Sporty. Sporty is separated. And I talked to Sporty in Pelican Bay State Prison, and he is batshit crazy. He's not stable. I knew that the moment I spoke to him. They wanted me to talk to him because he was considering the debriefing process. He was going in and talking to the IGI on a number of occasions, but he was hesitant to debrief. He had just gotten speared. He had just got speared, and they wanted him to participate in a full debrief. So I told him, I said, if you're going to do it, do it. If not, then don't. But, they can put you in a place where you'll be safe. They eventually end up moving Sporty. I don't know whether he debriefed or not. I know I saw him in the IGI's office, but I can't say for certain that he participated in the debrief. I'm certain that he did, but I don't have facts, so I don't want to throw that on him. But if he was in the IGI's office talking, that's a good indication. I know what I was doing there. I was debriefing. So there's the snitch scandal. I never heard about that. I'm just going to be honest. I never heard that about Darryl. He was always a stand-up guy. I never liked him either. Never liked him. Never got along with him. Barely said hello to each other when we saw each other in visiting or when I was in the same unit with him. Because he was Indio's buddy. And Indio was a San Quentin brother, right? And I told you those guys are very cliquish, right? And I went to this before, but I never liked him, right? When I heard about the next scandal, that's when I thought, okay, this guy's getting in over his head. Darryl's getting involved in like real scandal. The next scandal involves Chano Chavez. That's Chano depicted on the left. And on this picture, the larger picture here, that's Chano Chavez with the circle around his head. The individual on the right of the large picture is Calacas from Chino, I believe. But this is him in life. He had just paroled. Chano Chavez was with me in D6 with Jaco Padilla, Jaco from Azusa, and Tonito from Wilmas, Emiliano Zapata Lopez. We just did a story on Emiliano Zapata Lopez, Tonito. But he was there with us. And Chano was married to a girl by the name of Charlene, right? And Charlene was controversial, to say the least. Right? To say the least. And he was going through a divorce with her. And it caused a huge political scandal in the organization. This is before the DNC facility war. This was going on. It was Tupi versus Chano. Yep. We're talking about Tupi Hernandez, right? That's Tupi right there. Check out those moves. He's got man boobs, right? I mean, they are ginormous. That's Tupi in life, right? And Tupi was a good friend of mine, right? He was batshit crazy. I mean, Tupi was crazy. At the end, I saw Tupi in the visiting room. He had already been hit in MDC. This is before his time in MDC, right? This is at Pelican Bay State Prison. He had got whacked at MDC, and after that, he just slowly started ebbing away. I remember on the last time I saw him, I was at a visiting room. He was right behind me, and he turns around and he tells me, Rene. And I said, what's up, bro? He says, there's cameras in my vent, and there's recording devices in my vent. And I just look at him. I said, what? He says, yeah. Topo had the placas, or the cops, put recording devices in my vent. And I knew that was like crazy, right? Not that they don't put recording devices in the vent. I played audio from recordings that were taken in and around the cell that law enforcement had placed listening devices to pick up ambient conversation, right? I've done that a number of times, so it's not far-fetched, but the manner in which he said it and the look in his eyes were as big as 50-cent pieces. Tupi was known for always getting meth sent it to him to the mail, and he was tweaking that day. I could tell he was grinding his jaws, and he was saying that there was cameras in his vent, that Topo had the cops put them there. And I turned around and told him, just put a towel over the vent, bro. Oh, and he said, oh, okay. And they just turned around and continued with his visit. But I knew he was gone at that point. Nobody would say hi to him. They stoned him out. That's when you're on disregard. Nobody's supposed to talk to you. I still talked to him. I was like, he was my friend, and I knew we had to eliminate him. The decision was already made, and they already made the first attempt on him. But I was still going to talk to him. And nobody was going to tell me anything. And nobody did, because he was our carnal and he had that coming. Just a common courtesy, right? That's Stupi depicted in death. He died from hepatitis C, liver failure. He died in a prison hospital. That's his body depicted there. And, at least he went out of natural causes. So that was the first instance that Darryl got in the beef with Chano. But it was not just with Chano. It was with Tupi as well. Chano had a beef with Tupi as well because Tupi had a brother named Kiwi. And because Chano was getting divorced from Charlene, he approved that his brother have an affair with her. So he literally said, yeah, you could screw her. And he did. Obviously, he did. So Chano was irate. He was irate. Like, this is my wife, and how can this dude say this? And he'd sworn to eliminate Tupi. And we were behind him, like, said, look, dude, if that was my wife, I'd do the same thing. But you need to do it. You need to take action. And if you're going to eliminate him, you got to eliminate her. right? That was the agreement among all of us in the pod, myself, Jaco, and Tonito. So look, you're talking all this high power stuff about Tupi. You're trying to get people on board, and we support your principle, but you need to take action. You need to go sell up with him, and you need to deal with this. Personally, I think Tupi would have hurt him, but he never made that attempt. He never made that attempt, but because he was short to the house. He was months away from paroling, and he does parole. But before that, Charlene is also sending money to Babo Castellanos and Braulio Castellanos. That's Babo and Tablas from Florencia. She's dumping off tens of thousands of dollars to Darryl Castrejon, Tupi Hernandez, Babo, and Tablas. She's really dumping money off. She had just hit the lottery. Charlene won the California lottery, and that's what Chano was trying to control. Chano was trying to control that money from the lottery. Even though they were getting divorced, Chano wanted his cut of that money because it's a community asset, right? Ultimately, she paid Chano approximately $80,000 and they settled on the divorce. Soon thereafter, Chano was eliminated on the streets by camaradas sent by carnales. Do you see the thread here? That this is a common thing in the organization that nobody knows. Camaradas were sent to eliminate a carnal. Camaradas were sent to eliminate a carnal at the request of a group of brothers who were benefiting from Charlene's money. Charlene was a tactician. She was a tactician, right? And she wasn't unfamiliar with controversy. In fact, when I was in D6 in Pelican Bay State Prison, it was then that I learned that she was politicking on me too. In fact, she saw a news story where Chris Blatcher was doing a news story on me, and she immediately said that I was PC and an informant based on the news story. I didn't say a word to Chris Blatcher. I had never participated in any media interview, but she started telling Mexican Mafia members and associates that I was a PC. The person who told me about that was Jaco Padilla. He says, yeah, she said this about you. Chano was kind of nervous because he knows you're going to be pissed off. And I was extremely upset. And I went and talked to Chano. I said, hey, what's your wife's trip, dude? And Chano assured me, like, she's never going to say that again. She is not going to talk about that. She's retracted it and she apologizes to you. And I was cool with it because Chaco asked me to give the guy a pass, right? Tell Chano's a good friend of mine. He's a good brother. He just got in. He's involved in this controversy with Tupi. You know, he doesn't need this, right? So I let it go. I literally let it go. Chano apologized. He said his wife apologized. I never met her. I know she had blonde hair and she was a looker back in the day. But I mean, I've seen pictures of her and she wasn't bad looking. But I didn't appreciate that she did that. So Darryl, all this controversy swirls Chano, right? It swirls around Chano, and Darryl's deeply embedded in it. So Darryl's always been involved in these political controversies. He wasn't squeaky clean, right? He always picked a side, and he hung with that side. Charlene Chavez, also known as Charlene Marie Castrejon, is known in public records as the former wife of high-ranking Mexican Mafia member Darryl D. Castrejon. Number one, the lottery win. In April 1991, Charlene Chavez, then 32 years old and living in Fontana, California, won a share of a massive California lotto jackpot alongside her 62-year-old father, Robert Salazar. They were among a small group of winners who stepped forward to claim their multi-million-dollar shares at the lottery's regional office. So, try as I might, I could not get a photo of Charlene Chavez or Charlene Chavez Castrejon. I could not find a photo of her. I remember seeing one. In fact, I had one back in the day. I just don't know where it's at. But she won the lotto. That's what everybody was fighting over. And that's what Darryl realized, that she's a honeypot, right? She's a honeypot. So Darryl ended up marrying her. Chano gets eliminated. Tupi dies. Babo and Tablas are doing life. Darryl gets out of prison after committing this elimination on Montgomery in 1984 in San Quentin because he pled guilty to that case. He pled guilty. It was dead bang. They shot him in the eye, hence the eye patch, and he accepts a plea of a manslaughter. Because he's already doing a life sentence, right? Manslaughter's not going to do anything else. Lo and behold, Castrejon appeals his original conviction. He appeals his original conviction, and what happens? They rule in his favor. They rule in his favor, and they have to release him. Because the time on his manslaughter is already done. It's done. So he gets out, and he marries Charlene Chavez, Chano's ex-wife. And the girl who's been spreading around money, visiting all these Mexican Mafia members, he marries her. He marries her. But Charlene faced her own legal troubles as well. She was not without controversy. Like I said, she's been involved in a lot of controversy. She's one of those wives that stuck her nose in everybody's business and got people hurt, including her ex-husband, Chano. He got eliminated behind her. He didn't get eliminated over arguments, conflict, or Mexican Mafia politics. I won't say that she had him eliminated, but the controversy that swirled around her contributed to his death. We all knew that. I was there when it happened. I spoke to Chano personally. Mexican Mafia members had discussed it with me. This is one of the major factors that brought about his demise. I'm not saying she's personally responsible for it or participated in the conspiracy to eliminate him at all. I just know that she was swirled up in this controversy that cost Chano his life. Cost Chano his life. So Charlene Chavez faced her own legal troubles. Let's read that off now. Federal tax fraud conviction. Years after her separation and ties to Castrejon, Charlene Castrejon, then living in Hemet, California, ran into her own major legal issues. Prison sentence. In March 2019, at age 60, she was sentenced to 4 years in federal prison after pleading guilty to wire fraud and aggravated identity theft. She participated in a scheme that submitted nearly $2 million in fraudulent tax refunds and was ordered to pay over $500,000 in restitution. So Charlene stayed in the mix, and she was ultimately convicted, sent to prison, and I don't know what her status is now or where she's at now. I just know she was sent to prison. This is a picture of Darryl Castrejon in his early days in San Quentin, circled in the red in the upper left. As a matter of fact, all these guys are Mexican Mafia members here. These are some of the dinosaurs, historic figures in the organization. This is another picture of Darryl Castrejon with Mexican Mafia members in San Quentin as well. Darryl's depicted with the red circled face. Then Darryl got out of prison. He had his original conviction overturned. He had pled guilty to the manslaughter on Montgomery and gets out and marries Charlene. He marries into millions. That's really what he did. He married into money, and it worked for him. In fact, Darryl was so involved in the Mexican Mafia that he participated in conspiracy, and this is what really brought him down. The murder, conspiracy, and disappearance. The green light in 2005. Castrejon and several co-defendants were accused of plotting to kill Francisco Frankie B. Buena, a fellow Mexican Mafia member. La M leadership had allegedly green-lighted Buena for extorting and collecting taxes in Pomona neighborhoods without gang authorization. The wiretap and arrest. Law enforcement intercepted the plot via wiretaps, arrested Castrejon and his co-conspirators before they could carry out the hit. Buena was later shot and killed by separate attackers at a Pomona sports bar in 2007. This is Frankie B, and this is the bar where he was executed. So Dashing D participates in this conspiracy after he just beat a life sentence, after he did the time on the elimination of Montgomery in 1984. And he's a free man. He hooks up with the millionairess and goes right back to it over scraps in the hood, over literal hundreds of dollars of being collected by Frankie B. I don't remember Frankie B ever being on the lista. This is a personalized issue for turf encroachment. That's what started happening in the early years when people were carving up territories. Certain carnales were just taxing where they could, like Tonito. And Frankie B was known for this too. I never heard anybody say that Frankie was no good. This was a personal plot against Frankie B crafted by Darryl Castrejon. But two camaradas also went in and eliminated Frankie B. Not one carnal was involved in that. So you see in the theme here that the Mexican Mafia frequently sends camaradas to eliminate carnales. They've done it to Chano Chavez. They did it to Frankie B. They did it to Deadeye Ed. They did it to a number of carnales. This is not an unprecedented incident, right? There was just no controversy brought up over this, right? Over these incidents. They were just swept under the rug. So Frankie B gets eliminated. Dashing D is eligible for bond because he doesn't have parole, probation. He discharged on his sentence from the California Department of Corrections, and he posts $1 million bond. He posts $1 million bond and attends all court appearances are met. He's there religiously. He adheres to the schedules. But 3 days before trial is supposed to start, Dashing D disappears. The $1 million bail. Despite facing life in prison, Castrejon managed to secure $1 million bond by putting up family members' homes as collateral. If I'm recalling correctly, it was his father's home and his daughter's home that were put up as collateral, but our one version has it that Charlene put up quite a bit of cash to get him out of prison as well. After that, he was gone. He took off to Mexico. That was the rumor, that he was in Mexico, that he was working with cartels over there, and then we heard that he was eliminated. And a couple of years ago, that dashing Darryl Castrejon was eliminated by the cartels, skinned alive, and then shot to death and hung off a bridge. That has not been confirmed. I got to reiterate that because a lot of people say he's gone, but Darryl Castrejon had obviously created these rumors in the past and 2 previous occasions where he was eliminated. It's proven to be false. They have no DNA confirmation, and the identity match with the body didn't match. So law enforcement still has him as an outstanding fugitive. He's still wanted. And if he was deceased, that would have been resolved. So that's the controversy behind Darryl Castrejon. That's the whole story. All those controversies, all these carnales involved. When I tell you it's Byzantinian and incestuous, I truly mean it. There are so many overlying stories involved with one story that you can't just tell one snippet of it and then nobody knows the real background of it. Darryl was involved in so many controversies, and ultimately the last controversy is whether he was eliminated by the cartels or not. As always, have yourself a safe day. Enjoy yourselves. I'm out. Peace.